Over the years, in my work, I'm constantly doing my best to change, evolve, and address, let's say, the zeitgeist or the status quo of how we live. For me, design is very important that we address sort of social behavior. And what that means is then, it's not about evolving to follow trend. I'm not the least bit interested in trend. In fact, I think trend is a bit of the antichrist of design. And it's very careful that you have to stay back and find what's inside you and find what your expression is. And at the same time, collaborate very, very well with companies. Because at the end of the day, design is not an art. It's a commercial agenda. It's a creative act, yes, but it's a social act, it's an economic act, it's a political act, design. So over these years, it's changed a lot. When I look back at the time I entered the profession, I started my own practice quite late. I was 33 years old. It was 1993, because I had worked with other design offices. In 93, that time was that every brand, especially the Italian design scene, had their own complete identity. And they were so different than each other. Like the automotive industry back in the 60s, 70s was so different. And every company or brand had not only their own philosophy and their own vision, but they made sure they differentiated themselves. How has design evolved since then? It's become so commercial now that many companies have blurred sort of their identity to the point where many are almost the same. And it's shocking to me, and I think this has also got to do with social media, but it also has to do with global economics and globalization, is how it's very difficult now to understand the identity or the brand language or the brand equity or the brand culture of certain companies now. So I think the evolution hasn't gone in the right way, it's sort of gone in the wrong way. With that said, when everything starts to become the same, I call it the beige world now, inevitably, a lot of companies are going to disappear, because when you start competing with almost the same objects and products and everything, the only where you can compete generally is price point. And this is a problem, because there's always some company that will make something cheaper, always. And we see that what's happening with door. So these companies are probably going to start now realizing aggressively that they have to re-establish their identity and try to find a new vision to move into this next decade. So, my approach, if I design or shift from what I call micro to macro, like Manfredi wrote a book years and years ago, Italian sort of philosopher, and he wrote a book called From the City to the Spoon, or The Spoon to the City. What Italians managed to do beautifully post-World War II, since there were so many architects graduating and little work, little to build, they started designing products. Yes, we know this, the coffee machines and Vespas and all these products. So the Italians were basically doing industrial design. The architects were doing industrial design. And the Italians were very good at moving from scale and also being sort of multidisciplinary. Whereas the rest of the world, design firms generally, or designers, were very specialized. Somebody was doing watches, they spend their life doing watches. Somebody's doing high tech, they spend their life making keyboards and objects. But when I was in university, I was following the sort of Italian scene, and I had stacks of Domus magazine and stacks of Interni on my desk. And we're talking about 1979, 1980, I show my age now, okay? And so I was influenced by this idea, I can touch something like a shoe, this is my new shoe I designed, shoe to sunglasses. I can touch something like a mobile phone, but at the same time I can do a condominium or a restaurant, or right now I'm making hotel. And so, first of all, it was my interest, this idea of shifting scale. What the important part about all this is every project has its own set of criteria. And the criteria is, first of all, the company you work for, the production methods they use, the materials they use, their brand philosophy, their vision. You have developers when you start doing an architecture, you have budgets. So all this criteria will shape the project. So if you listen to the criteria and you embrace the criteria, you take the criteria as an opportunity, not as a limitation, right? Then you'll do a great project. It doesn't matter what scale it is. So at the end of the day, good design is good design. Would be it micro or macro. Today, between designer and industry, we now know that this can work seamlessly and beautifully, right? And we've seen amazing product and design over these last years. With that said, we're moving into a time of this sort of AI digital dystopia, I would call it, because it's disruptive, and things are changing. All of a sudden, the designer is being pushed a little bit out of industry, or the designer is being pushed out of, let's say, spatial development, because the tools are becoming very easy now, easier and easier and easier for everybody to participate. With that said, I was a huge believer that, to me, every human being is creative and capable of original thought and original creativity. I always believed in this, the democratization of creativity. But with that said, here's the problem. Problem is that the professions and the professionals are starting to be pushed out. And I feel it with me and hundreds of other thousands. I have known so many architects in the world that are laying off many people. So we're starting to, because the tools are affording people to work without us. Now, here's the problem. Most companies and most people sort of follow trend, right? So if you push the architect and designer or the creative out, you inevitably do trend. If you want to have an original, differentiated position in the world, you need these people. So I think that's where things are evolving. The outcome of that, I don't know. It's a very long discussion, this notion of how artificial intelligence is going to reshape us, and not only reshape us, but turn the world upside down. We have to, all of us, every company in the world, every designer, every architect, every manufacturer, every developer has to think sustainably. Has to. We have no option. This earth will be gone in 200 years unless all of us are very proactive at this. But with that said, a lot of times people think it's the responsibility of the designer, but it's actually the responsibility, obviously, of the manufacturer, firstly. But secondly, I think the way to make this big change, and for 30 years now, we've been sort of putting the onus on the consumer. It's the consumer that has to worry about recycling. No. The consumer has to worry about not having a plastic bag. No. These have to be government mandates, globally government mandates. Governments have to get together and say, no more of these parabens in your cosmetics, no more of this kind of preservatives and artificial things in your food, no more of materials that are basically not biodegradable or recyclable. It should be one or the other. And it's a very difficult fight in a way. I spent the last 30 years talking to companies about these things, and I find I don't get anywhere. So I'm starting to realize, if a company, for example, makes a polymer like this is polyethylene that I'm sitting on, right? Okay, I love rotational molding, I love the process, I love the material, I work with it 40 years, but I will say there is the way to combat here sustainability is to design an object that has longevity. So for me, the real culprit is disposability, not the material.